Hi, you're listening to Radio Taiwan International, and this is Geek Out. I'm your host, Michelle Chang, and basically, we're back with part 2 of Nicole and Arrow.
Hi.
Yes, but Geek Out, we're all about talking about what people are super enthusiastic about. What are your passions, right? So, Nicole, what do you do?
Well, so my name is Nicole / Undead Dice. I am also a handmade dice maker, which you can see my cursed creations at undead_dice on Instagram.
Yes, go check it out. Check them out. They're amazing.
And dice, I mean, people think, okay, dice maker, why would you make dice?
It's kind of an odd thing to be making if you're not a super nerd like us.
Right, because perhaps some people who are more interested in like nerdy things may be thinking, dice, what can you use dice for? What games? It's mainly for Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes. So Dungeons and Dragons is played with, normally your most traditional is a 7-piece poly set, and that includes a 4-sided dice, 6-sided, 8, 10, a percentage, which is really a 10-sided dice but with more numbers on it, 12, and a 20.
Mm-hmm.
Is that how you make your sets?
That is yep, that is the standard set. Of course, some people have a 2-sided coin.
Oh, you could, yeah.
You could add more 6s, you could add more 20s. It's very customizable. But traditionally, what I would sell as a set is a 7-piece set. And obviously, it's like, okay, how do you make these dice?
Yes.
Are they carved?
Right.
No?
I mean, there's actually lots of different methods of making something like dice. I'm going to admit that I possibly follow a lot of dice makers that do like interesting things. There's this dude that lathes gemstones.
Yes.
But he sand polishes actual gemstones into dice, and they're just so pretty.
Right. And so, as you mentioned, people can, wood, you can buy them. Typically, the ones you buy in the store are plastic.
Yep.
I work with resin.
Yeah.
So that's the art resin, which traditionally you take 2 parts, you mix it together, there's a chemical reaction, and it will harden in the form you put it in. So how I do my work is I have silicone molds.
Silicone molds.
I say it?
Silicone molds.
Silicone.
Mold sounds
why
really
is
weird.
this sound so why is it hard to say?
Silicone.
Yeah.
Okay,
Silicone molds.
Perfect.
That you pour the resin into, and then you let it cure for traditionally 24 hours. You pop them out, and that's like bare minimum process. There are a million steps in between.
Yes.
It's like what the molds are made out of are typically what are called master dice. This is a set that's traditionally has been 3D printed for you with your custom font, because surprise, surprise about learning about dice making is fonts are copyrighted.
That is very true. Fonts are copyrighted, so you can't just use any font on your dice.
So you have to find something that's copyright free. So sometimes people even will hand make their fonts and then even put their logos on their dice. So my signature logo piece is, rather than having just the logo on the highest face, it's a 20 with a skull as the 0.
Yes.
And then the 1 is a broken bone on the other side.
Oh, I love that.
It's so cool.
Oh, that's great.
Not to say I was one of the first that still using the 20 number with a design as the 0, but
that's really fitting because obviously undead dice, right? And a lot of people are they like to see the numbers, so that's actually a nice compromise.
That's why I did it, because there's something so visceral, I think, ingrained in us as D&D players when you see that 20 land, that you just have an instant serotonin boost. And so I was like, I still want to have the 20, but I still want to make it unique. And so since I had the name Undead Dice,
perfect,
might as well do that. So you have these master dice, you perfectly polish them, and then you set them up perfectly in individual containers. You pour the silicone mixture in there, cut them out, pop out the masters, and those are your molds.
Right.
Even that process can take you several days.
Yeah.
You can mess it up very easily.
Because those are your molds. You don't want them with any kind of error, with strange bubbles, locations, or whatever.
Right, because if you tear it, it's ruined. If it gets scratched up when it's any imperfection on the master dice will show up in the mold.
Oof.
And so the better your molds are, the less work you have to do finishing it.
That's true.
Then later, okay, you have these molds. Now what do you do? Well, you have resin and you want to put the resin in there, but you want to make it look pretty.
Of course.
So you can color it with dyes, you can add glitter, you can add flowers. I really liked putting things like snake skin, bones, teeth are my favorite medium to work with. Other people's
I love your style. It's very on brand.
Thank you. I just love putting things in dice that traditionally when I started back making it early 2020, January 2020, those things weren't really around, and that's why I was making it, is because I wanted to see dice that looked like flesh and blood and teeth, but also I wanted to see dice that had dragonfly wings in it, that had snake skin in it. One of my most popular sets are just dice that are filled with fruity pebbles, with a milky kind of white resin base and colorful ink to match them, and people were obsessed. And I just love putting stuff like that in dice. And obviously every medium you put in dice, though, you have to take into account, one, it has to be dry. Water and resin do not mix.
Oh, yeah.
Flowers and stuff, if you want them to be pretty, you have to have them be perfectly dried before you put them in. Things like that. Cereal, for the most part, is already pretty dry, and so are bones, so that's pretty good. But yeah, you kind of have to keep that in mind, as well as some things float in resin, some things sink. You also have to deal with, you're working on a very small scale.
Teeny.
It's, 20 millimeters across is traditionally a D20, and that is the largest standard size you're working with.
About a 1 inch, yes, a ball. Yeah.
And so you're also dealing with, it can't be too big or hard that whatever you're putting in there is poking through the mold or distorting it. That's a lot of issue with a lot of bones I work with.
Right.
And also bones sink. So often I do it in several layers where I pour half the resin in there, let it cure, and then I can put the bone so it perfectly floats in the middle.
Wow, so it's like a multi-day process because it takes 24 hours to cure at a time.
Right.
So you'll pour a layer and then you'll add some, we call them inclusions, guys. Things that are included inside dice. That's the right terminology. And then you pour another layer of resin, cure it, and possibly more inclusions, and then another. Oh, man.
And so, yeah, it's this several day process, because even once you pour it, you seal in your little resin in your silicone molds. Traditionally, if you're like really serious about dice making, you're going to hear that people have pressure pots.
Oh, yeah.
And so you basically put the resin in the pressure pot, you seal it, you put it at a high pressure point, and you let it sit there for 24 to 48 hours. And the pressure pot, the whole purpose of that is squeezing out all the bubbles so they're super microscopic and not an issue.
Wow.
Because you hear that about balance and bubbles and things like that, and especially with handmade dice where you're rolling them to play with them, people want them to quote unquote be balanced. So that's
let's vent about this for a moment, because I hear this all the time as a fellow dice seller. Okay, but are they balanced? is a very common question, because yes, it is a game that depends on the results of a dice roll. So the biggest difference between yours and mine is because mine are mass produced. They're I think they're made in somewhere between 500 and 2,000 at a time. So they can't obviously be made with such care as to include really tiny, well-placed bones or flowers and things like that. Any inclusions that they have to be done really fast. What I do, though, is when we do bring in a interesting style of die, is I do roll them to see if they do come out to be fairly balanced. And there's two kinds of people who roll dice, okay? People who actually roll dice, and then people who try to cheat. Which means you kind of just drop the dice on the side that you want. And then if you're rolling like that, even your solid all the way through one acrylic or one metal or one resin will not, is cheating. It's just cheating. But if you roll dice properly, which is give it, like a little bit of a wind up and then a release, and it hits something and it tumbles, that is a roll. If you do that, then regardless, I found none of the dice that I've ever sold that have inclusions would ever lean towards a certain set of numbers.
I've seen people, roll them 100 times and individually map out, and it ends up being, quote unquote, balanced, random, completely random. Even ones that have some inclusions like that, it ends up being such a lightweight or something that really seems so minuscule. And, you hear about the saltwater test, which is because of buoyancy, you can put the dice in there, and if there's a bubble in it, it'll float to the favored face. But again, like, that never ends up showing anything for our dice because we do take as much care as possible, but the only dice that are ever going to be 100% perfectly balanced are casino dice.
And they're actually really expensive for casinos to buy, right? And they're only produced in special factories. And actually, even then, I would say the only dice that you can 100% depend on are digital dice. Yes.
I'd like to interrupt.
Oh,
I think
please.
Because you cannot have a truly random number, even like mathematically coded. Random isn't real. Like, it's there's always some algorithm that it is following. It's as random as you can probably
make
get.
it, yeah.
It's probably still the best, but it's not always that like 100.000%. Like, it's not like the random. There's no true random.
There's no true random.
Yeah. Arrow's a math major, so
we got to listen to that. That was my worst subject. I'm sorry. We're very different people.
But basically what it comes down to is it's all about playing a game. No one's trying to create weighted dice. You know, we're creating this because it's beautiful and it's our form and it can be custom.
Exactly. I mean, there's people who collect dice who never play with them because they're pretty. And my mom actually just said, "Oh, they look like diamonds or, you know, other fancy precious stones." And that's exactly what it is. That triggers, I think, like the raven instinct and the crow brain. That's what it is. The crow brain, otherwise known as the dice goblin brain.
To get the shiny things.
Gotta get the shiny things.
And we collect all these trinkets.
Absolutely.
Like a dragon with their hoard.
And that's kind of, I think, what drives most people to own more than just the set they play with.
Right. We're just creating these beautiful things. And that's why I started creating them, is because I wanted this vision that was in my head. I mean, even once you pour it out of the mold, it's still not done. You have to sand it.
That's right. I forgot.
You have to sand.
It's largest part of the process.
Right. So besides the fact that you're waiting for the silicone to cure to make your master molds, that you are then waiting for the resin to cure in your pressure pot. You release the pressure. You take out the dice. You see if the design worked. Stuff reacts differently.
No.
Sometimes bubbles still come through. Like, it's called voids when the resin shrinks to a point that it like creates a huge dip in the dice face, and then it's just completely not usable at all, which you can try and patch it. But then you have to sand all what's called the flashing. So those are the seams that you have to close your resin mold.
I'm familiar with that term from miniature painting.
It's the same thing.
Same thing. It's the extra bit of plastic on a miniature that you have to sand off in order to get a smooth paint transfer.
Right. And so you have to sand it, right? And so I use a pottery wheel kind of to sand it, but people have preferences between if they use sandpaper or I use what's called Zona paper, which are polishing papers. People have different polishing pastes that they use to create like a mirror shine, but you sometimes go through the most minimal amounts I've seen are 3 different like sandpaper grits.
Yeah.
I traditionally use about 5. 7 is pretty standard.
Oh man.
It's different. You find what works for you because you're trying to eliminate both the flashing, but you're also trying to make it shiny and pretty.
Of course.
But also you're trying to make it like on a D20 and stuff, all those triangles have certain corners and stuff. So if you over sand, let's say the one that has the flashing, you now have to overcorrect.
Oh no.
And sand all the other faces. And that's honestly what takes a long part of the process, and what takes practice is really learning how to sand. It can also be really hard on your body, on your wrists, how you're sitting. Basically, sanding for me takes about 3 hours. When I started, it took upwards of 7 to 9 hours. And it's only because
on one set?
On one full set. One full set, I say, takes 3 days, about 5 to 7 direct work. Like hours of direct work on it.
Okay. To put that into, perspective, the mass-produced dice are taken out of their molds, and mass-produced dice are tumbled in a polisher. So if they started out sharp edge, they're definitely not when they come out. Well, the product that you receive is pretty rounded, very smooth edged. They do definitely have edges, but it's beveled, something like that.
Yeah, and so you're really working to like try and minimize as much work as possible, but like you're kind of a perfectionist and it's an art form and you're really trying to make it look as good as
So you
possible.
can't watch a TV show in the background as you're sanding?
Oh, I do.
Oh, you do?
I watched all of Critical Role season 2, which is like hundreds upon hundreds of hours, just because you have it up. But I'm not. My eyes are on the dice. I'm
You can just listen to
like,
them.
Podcasts
They're
are
great.
good. Music, yeah.
And
TV
Nicole's a multitasker.
Oh,
She
yeah.
will do whatever. Always has the media up.
Yeah, and so, but basically, you polish it, it's done. But now the numbers that came out of the mold, they're blank. You have to ink them still. So then you take typically acrylic paint. Everyone kind of has their own different like favorite medium, and then you fill in all those numbers, and you wipe them off, and you clean it. You let it dry, and then ta-da! Now you
Finally
have a set of dice.
So one set of dice, especially if you have to do one of those layered ones, can take. What's the minimum number of days and what is the maximum number of days?
I would say the minimum number of days is 2.
Okay.
Because you have to have the day that you mix the resin, and then it normally has to cure for 24 hours standardly, but sometimes you can take them out maybe at 12 hours. And then sanding them, which will take upwards of 2 hours if you're really fast to 7 hours. So
and then you ink and
then you ink and stuff.
Wow. So 2 days is the minimum. So how long is the longest that you've ever taken on a set of dice?
Honestly, I would say weeks, because it doesn't just start with that single set. Is sometimes you can have an idea and you just go for it and it works out perfectly, but really in all art, 1, you need practice, and 2, resin is a fickle medium and you really got to practice, so sometimes I'm working on a design set, but then on the side I have what's called tester molds. And so I'm like, okay, I'm trying to get this perfect color or design. And so I'm mixing, especially for stuff when I was working like on my teeth dice and stuff like that. Like I wanted the colors to look like enamel.
Right.
And so like I'm not just gonna like wing it. I have to be testing, okay, how many parts orange and yellow is this gonna be versus brown and red, and so,
That's really
and so you're testing the design. You're working, like I have a little notebook that has recipes and drawings and sketches and colors and stuff. And so you're testing it, and then you try and do the full set, and sometimes the full set doesn't work. And it doesn't work, and it doesn't work. And that's one reason why I don't do commissions anymore.
Because certain styles or ideas, just into ideas in general, need to be tested before you are successful at it.
Right.
And guys, before we come to a close on this, it's actually I learned a lot. A really fascinating subject. That is why handmade anything, but especially dice, command a cost, because that is how many hours it took to create this product. Absolutely.
And not only just hours, and you want to be paid a minimum wage, but it's also how much it costs for all the ingredients and supplies you're using.
Oh, yeah.
The space. You mentioned before the ventilation, because you need protection equipment. You need respirators for your mouth because there are toxic fumes. You need gloves because that is a chemical that can burn your skin essentially if you become too sensitive to it. You can breathe in the sanding particles. You got to protect your eyes.
Also, you have spent years perfecting this craft. Like you have put in effort, and you deserve to get paid for that effort.
Absolutely.
Even if you're making your dice faster, you have spent all that time to do it to make it faster. So you're not just getting the cost of like, this is a number of hours I put into it. You kind of have to take into account like how much you've really put into this craft.
Yes, bringing this idea to fruition, basically. So there are dice for everyone out there. I mean, if you can't afford handmade dice, then there are inexpensive things, and you can just set your eyes on that goal eventually. But I personally have a few sets, and they're really something. They're really something. And when you understand the amount of work that went into them, holding them in your hand is an experience.
And but if you do want some wonderful produced dice at Phoenix Dice, our lovely Michelle here, I plug right back at you.
Yes, so phoenixdice.com, where you can get all of your adventuring gear needs.
And if you want to see dice that look like teeth, blood, eggs, have cereal, dragonfly, wings, bugs, bits, and all sorts of bony things, check out at undead_dice on Instagram. The account may seem dead, but I promise you there is life underneath that soil, working to come back very soon.
Yes.
Life and death.
Yeah, we'll be right back, and we're going to ascend with Arrow's climbing hobby. It's gonna be great. We're gonna see you next Thursday. Bye.
Bye.